Hey guys, welcome to our Node.js tutorial. In this video, we shall cover the fundamentals of Node.js and Express. Also, we shall learn how to connect our Express server to a database, and we shall use MongoDB for that. So, what is Node.js? Node.js is an open source JavaScript runtime environment that executes JavaScript code outside the browser. In simple terms, Node.js is JavaScript running on the server. So for all you need to know to follow up well on this course, I would say you need to know at least the basics of HTML and JavaScript. If you don't, there are links in the description to those courses. Also, knowing things like HTTP status codes and methods will be an advantage. But if you don't, that is not a problem. We shall jump into a refresher section before starting Node.js and Express properly. Now, the IDE or the editor we shall use for this course is Visual Studio Code. If you don't have one, you can go to code.visualstudio.com to get one for free. So when you head to code.visualstudio.com, click here to download if you're using a Windows machine. If you're using a Mac OS, click here to download for a Mac OS. So at this stage, we are going to brush some JavaScript concepts that we are going to need throughout this course. So let's create a folder on our desktop. I'll create a folder using my terminal, my VS Code terminal, and I'll cd into desktop. Right now, I'm on my desktop, and I'll say mkdir, and I'll call this folder refresher. My folder has been created. Now I can open that folder in my VS Code by clicking on File, selecting Open Folder, and opening the folder like this. Click on Select Folder. I have my refresher folder opened in my VS Code currently. So the first thing we shall be looking at is Tenary Operators. So let's create a file called refresher.js where we shall have all our JavaScript code written inside, and let's look at Tenary Operators. Tenary Operators are used to check the trueness of a variable. So let's set a variable to a Boolean value, and let's check for the trueness of that variable using an if statement, and let's check for the trueness of that variable using Tenary Operators. There we are going to see the difference clearly. So let's say it's human, and let's set this to true. If I want to check the trueness of this variable here using an if statement, I'm going to create a function first. I'll create a function here, and I'll call this human checker, and I would say if this human is true, console.log I am human, else console.log I am not. Now let's console.log this function so that it can run in the terminal. Let's pass that in there. So let's run this function in the terminal, and I'm running this in the terminal because I don't have an index.html file here which will load in the browser to let me see the output of this code in the console. So let me pull up my terminal. I'll be using Node to run this. So if you don't have Node installed in your system already, this is not going to work. So all you need to do is to come over to your browser and go to nodejs.org. Now when you find yourself here, click on Downloads. If you are using a Windows laptop, click here. If you're using a Mac laptop, click here. And if you want the source code, you click here. So when you click on Windows Installer for a Windows laptop, your file is going to start downloading. Now when the file completes downloading, double click on the file to begin installation. It's pretty easy. Now when the installation is complete, to be sure your installation was complete, pull up your command prompt, type node :version. Now you'd have this come out. This is the version of my Node. Yours may differ from mine because I have Node installed a long time ago on my laptop. So with that, you know you have installed Node successfully. So let's go back to our VS Code and let's run this file with the node that we have in our system. So I would say node refresher. Now I can say node refresher.js, and I can also say node refresher because Node already knows that this file is a JavaScript file, so I don't need the .js extension. So I would hit enter now, and this code is going to run. So as you can see, it says I am human as the output here, and I am human is our output because is human is set to true, and we said if is human is set to true, return I am human in the console for us. Now I'm going to recreate this using Tenary Operators. So I'll get rid of this function and I'll set a variable called result, and I would say is human true. If is human is true, give us this, yes I am human, or else give us this, no I am not. And that's all. So when I console.log result and I run this in the terminal once more, you see I have this that says yes I am human. If I change this to false and I run the code in the terminal again, it says no I am not. So this one line of code has replaced the function and the if statements. So you see we have less code using ternary operators. So I would like to explain this literally using the question mark here. Let's look at this like, is human true? Asking with this question mark. If it's true, return yes I am human, or else this colon sign here stands for else, or else return no I am not. As simple as that. So let's move over to the next concept known as destructuring. So we shall make use of this concept when building applications with Node.js and Express. So before we write some code, destructuring is simply unpacking object properties from objects, or unpacking array values from arrays. So let me go down to it. Let me create an object here and let's call this my object, and let me set this to name. Let me say James, that's the name. Let me say location, and let me set the location to Africa, and let me set the statement to stop gender violence, gender-based violence, and let's save that. Now if I console.log my object and I run this in the terminal, you'd see I have all the objects returned to me. Now destructuring makes it possible for me to grab just one property in this object and use it as a standalone variable on its own. So let's say I want to grab location out of my object. I'd come here, I would say const, and I'll pass in the curly brackets there because I'm trying to grab stuff out of an object, and I'll set this to my object. Now inside the curly brackets, I'll pass in what I want to grab from my object, and what I want to grab at this stage is location. So when I say location and I console.log location, if I run this in the terminal, you'd see I would have Africa returned to me. So as you can see, I have only Africa returned to me. Now I can grab more than one object property from this object. I can say location and I'll put comma there, and I'll say name. Now when I come here and I console.log name and I run this code, you'd see I have Africa and I have James. Now in the body of my code, I can use location or name as variables, and the value of location or name will be Africa and James. So that's the use of the structuring objects in JavaScript. So let's move over to talk about modules. Modules are simple. Just understand modules to be files. So if I create another file here, I say another.js, I have created another module. So inside this file here, or inside this module, I can have a function, I can have a class, I can have 3, 10 functions, I can have 5 or 10 or 60 classes, I can have anything I want to have inside this module, same as this module. So modules are files, as simple as that. So let's move ahead to talk about arrow functions in JavaScript. Since we shall be making use of arrow functions more, I felt it would be nicer to go over it again in an easier way for those who are not yet comfortable with using arrow functions. So let's write a regular function and let's convert the regular function to an arrow function so we shall understand how it's done properly. So I would create a function here and I would say name of function because that's where you're passing the name of the function, and I'll pass in some arguments. I would say name, place, and I'll say profession. Now inside of this I'll pass in a variable. Let's call it result also, and let's say my name is, let's concatenate that and let's pass in name there, and let's say and I live in, let's concatenate place right there, and I'd say my profession is, let's concatenate profession right there, let's say profession, and let's put a plus sign there, and I would say thanks, just something basic. Now let's return results right here. So when I come out and I console.log the function and passing in values for the arguments, I would say console.log name of function, and for the name I would say Joseph, for the place I would say Africa, and for the profession I would say development. When I run these in the terminal, you see it says my name is Joseph and I live in Africa, my profession is development, thanks. Now let's recreate this function right here with an arrow function. It's easy, just pass in the const keyword because it's going to keep it as a constant. So we are going to say const and pass in the name of the function. Then let's set this to a bracket that's going to take the argument. Let's say name, place, and profession. Now when we go out there, we pass in the equal sign and the greater than sign and our curly brackets. Now take note, the equal sign and the greater than sign must not have any space in between them. You must not have it like this. They must always be together. So after that, we are going to pass in results here also, and in this case we shall use backticks, not quotation marks, and backticks can be found on top your tab key or beneath the escape key. So when we use our backticks, we can now concatenate our variables and our strings inside the backticks without going out of the backticks like we did here using quotation marks. So I'm going to say my name is, and I use the dollar sign and the curly brackets to say name, and I live in, I'll use the dollar sign to say place, and I'm going to say my profession is, I'll use the dollar sign to say profession. So if I come down here and I return results, I'll be fine. So when I console.log, but before that, let's take this out so we don't have any error. So when I console.log name of function now with values for our arguments, and I say name of function, and I pass in Joseph, and I pass in Africa, and I pass in development. When I run this in the terminal, you'd see we have the same thing coming out. My name is Joseph and I live in Africa. My profession is development. So I have been able to recreate that other function with the arrow function method. So it's very easy. The const keyword, the name of the function, an equal to sign here, then you pass in your brackets for arguments, then the equal sign with the greater than sign. This is the most important thing you have to take note of in an arrow function. This makes it an arrow function. Then with the curly brackets. So why I'm saying this makes it an arrow function is because sometimes you may get to see a function looking like this, and this is an arrow function still. So as you can see, I had no name or no const behind it. but this is always going to be there to indicate to you that this is an arrow function. And I can have anonymous functions like this sometimes. This is still an arrow function. So I can have a function like this that says name, and I'll set this to I am my name. If I console.log name and I invoke it and I run this in the terminal, you see it says I am my name. And that's because this is a valid arrow function, just one line of code. So as you can see, the arrow function makes it possible to write less code. So why I have this without the curly brackets is because when you are trying to return just one value in an arrow function, you can do that without the curly brackets. I can also pass in one argument there and take off brackets like that. This is also possible in an arrow function. But take note, you can only take off this bracket if you have only one argument being passed here. If you have more than one argument like this, you must pass in the brackets there to wrap them before it's going to be a valid arrow function. So these are things you'd get to see when we start writing Node and Express. So let's talk about one more concept in functions before we move ahead. And we are going to talk about callback functions. Callback functions are functions that are inside a function. So let's say I have a function in JavaScript called name. So it's going to be like this, right, with the bracket in front of it. If I pass in a function called word here inside the name function, this function called word is a callback function. Now it can be a regular function, it can be an arrow function. Most times you'd see me using arrow functions in this course. So if it's an arrow function, like I said, the most important thing is this. This has made it an arrow function. So always take notes. So let's get rid of this and let's talk about JSON. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And JSON is similar to the regular JavaScript object. But in this video, I'm going to talk about just one difference between JSON objects and regular JavaScript objects. So let's create a JavaScript object and let's say JavaScript object, let's say name right there, and let's say and let's pass in location and let's say Armenia. Let's save that. Now let's copy this, let's paste that, let's change this to JSON objects. Now, like I said, I'm going to point out just one difference between JSON object and JavaScript object, and that's simple. If this is a JSON object, the key here, which is name, will be wrapped in quotes, and the location also, which is a key, will be wrapped in quotes. Now this has converted this object here to a JSON object, and this is a regular JavaScript object. Now just take note that in a JSON object, the key and the value pairs are wrapped in quotes, except the value pairs are numbers or booleans. That's all about JSON. So let's talk about HTTP methods and request. So we are going to talk about the get, post, put, and delete methods and request. So the get method in HTTP is invoked when a user makes a get request. A get request is when we try to get information from a server or from a database. So if I'm trying to get my picture from Facebook, it means I am sending a request to the Facebook server to send my picture to me. So that's a get request. A post request is when I am trying to send something to a server or to a database. So if I'm trying to send a post on my Facebook feed, or I'm trying to send a tweet, that's me making a post request. Or if I am filling a sign up form and I put in my name, email, and password, when I click sign up, I have sent a post request, and it's going to invoke the post method. The put method here is used to update what you posted. So if I post my profile to Facebook and I want to change my location from Kenya to Uganda, that's a put request. So the put HTTP method will be used for that. And delete right here is very literal. It means I want to delete what I posted. So take note, you cannot delete what someone else posted, and you cannot put on someone else's post. So you must make a post request for you to edit it or delete it. So let's talk about HTTP status codes. We know of 404. We are going to look at 404, 400, 200, 401, and 500. So we know what 404 stands for. It means page not found. Sometimes you may be browsing the internet and you click on the link and you see 404 displayed on the browser with the message page not found. 400 means it's a bad request. 200 means it's a good request. The request is okay. Now 401 is access denied. Maybe you are trying to access a route or a page without you being signed in. It's going to give you a 401 request message that says access denied. Now 500 is an internal server error. So we are going to make use of all of this when learning Node and Express. Now that's all for the refresher section. Let's move over to start learning Node.js. So let's learn about what we call packages in Node.js. Packages in software engineering as a whole are tools you need to make the engineering process easier. Using the construction of a house as an example, packages in house construction can be seen as chisels and hammers, ropes and shovels. Of course, we all know that the major things a house construction needs are cement, water, sand, and wood. But packages like ropes and shovels makes it easy to measure and dig on a straight line. So in Node.js, we shall use certain packages when building our applications. And all those packages will be stored in a file called package.json. So to start a Node project, let's create a folder on our desktop and let's call it tutorial. So I'll open a new window here in VS Code and I'll expand that. I'll go to the terminal. I'll open up my terminal. I'll cd to the desktop directory and I'll use the mkdir function to create a folder called tutorial. Now I'll open that folder in my VS Code, come in here and I'll click on select folder. Now you can do this the way you understand better. You can go to your desktop manually, right click on your desktop, click on new, create a folder called tutorial, come to VS Code and open the folder in your VS Code. It's still going to work fine. Let's pull up our terminal after opening the folder in VS Code and let's run npm init to create a package.json file. Let's pull this up so we see clearly. Now when I hit enter, it's going to ask me if I want to keep my package name as tutorial or change it. I want to keep it as tutorial. Hit enter. Hit enter. Description, I may say node lesson. Entry point index.js. You can leave it as index.js, but I like mine to be server.js. Some people use app.js. Whichever you use is going to work fine. I'll hit enter, hit enter, hit enter. Author, you can write your name there. Mine is Joseph Brendan. Hit enter and hit enter to complete. If you check here, you'd see our package.json file has been created. Now if we open the package.json file, you'd see we have all those details here. Our name for our package is tutorial. Our description is node lesson. Our main entry file is server.js and the author is Joseph Brendan. So that's that. So generating a package.json file is something I would advise you to do before you start building a Node application. So it's going to help you track all your dependencies and packages used for that project. And for those of us who may be seeing npm for the first time, npm stands for node package manager. Let's write that down here. Node package manager. And what npm does is npm is used to manage packages that we use in building. Remember, I explained what packages are. And when I say npm is used to manage packages, I mean it is used to install packages, update packages, or delete any package in development. So let's get rid of this. So let's create a server.js file. Let's say server.js file, which is our main entry point here. Now in a server.js file, let's run console.log anything. Let's just pass in anything there, and let's use Node to run this in the terminal also. So let's say node server, because I'm trying to run the server file here. It says anything, so everything is working fine. Let's get rid of that. Now let's talk about modules in Node.js. In Node.js, modules are files like we discussed earlier. These files can contain variables, classes, methods, or functions, or anything JavaScript. We shall talk about two types of modules in Node.js, and they are core modules, and local modules. So these are the two types of modules we shall talk about in this course. Core modules are modules that we did not create ourselves. It is already written and it is there waiting for us to use. These modules, always remember, are not created by us. And local modules are created by us to make our application more functional. So before we go over to start learning how to use modules, import modules, and export modules in Node.js, I want us to remind ourselves what a directory, a path, and a file is. It is very simple. A directory is a folder. A file is anything inside a folder apart from subfolders, obviously, and a path is the road you take to a file or a folder. So if I am going to Uganda from Nigeria and I take off from my current location to the Abuja airport, then to Nairobi, then finally Kampala, my path will look like this. Nairobi, Kampala. The dot here means current location, and the slash here means to. So this means from my current location to the Abuja airport to Nairobi, then to Kampala. So I'm just using this to explain how paths are being created in Node.js. Now let's look at exporting and importing modules in Node.js. So to learn how to import and export modules in Node.js, let us create a folder with the name impexp, import exports. That's that, impexp. And inside this folder, let's create a file inside the folder called impexp.js. Let's save that. Now inside the impexp.js file, let's initialize a slogan. Let's say our slogan set to stop raping women, and let's save that. Now I have created a variable in the impexp.js file. Now for any other file in our project here, and when I say our project, I mean the tutorial folder. For any other file in our tutorial folder, to access what we have in the impexp.js file, we have to export what we have here. So to do that is very easy. All we have to do is come down here, say module.export, exports with the S, and I'll set that to our slogan. I'll save that. So it's as simple as ABC. This means export our slogan, which is inside the impexp.js module. So if I come to server.js and I want to access this export here, it means I am going to import this module in server.js. And to import this module is very easy. All I'll do is to create a variable first. I'll call this impexp. This is a variable. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Now, to import a module, you would always use the require keyword. The require keyword here does the importation. So I'll pass in quotes and I'll pass in the path to my imp.exp.js file. So that was why I had to explain how paths are created. So you'd use the dot sign, which means my current location, to the imp.exp folder, to the imp.exp file. When I save that, it means I have imported this module and I have saved it in this variable. Now when I come down and I console.log imp.exp right there and I run this in the terminal, you'd see I have stop raping women, which is our slogan right here. But as you can see, I am running node server, which means I am running the server.js file. And this is possible because I have exported our slogan and I have imported it in server.js, which means server.js can now access what we have in imp.exp.js. Now, before we move ahead, just note that this is only how to import local modules, which means this is only how to import modules that we created ourselves. So let's ask ourselves, what if we have more than one variable here? What if we have our slogan, our music, our location, and other variables here? How do we export them? Because right here we are exporting only our slogan. That's easy. So let's create another variable here called our music, and let's set this to code play everyday life. Let's save that. So if I want to export this our music also, I'll get rid of this. I would export I would export everything independently. I would export our slogan as our slogan, and I'll export, I would say module.export.ourmusic equal to our music, and I'll save that. So this means I am selecting our slogan with module.export. I'm saying module.export and I'm selecting our slogan only, and I'm exporting it as a slogan. The same thing happens here. So right here we are exporting these two variables independently. Now let's go to server.js. So we are going to use the destructuring concept that we learned earlier on. So let's pass in the objects curly brackets there, and let's set this to require, and let's go to imp.exp folder and the imp.exp file. So inside here we are going to say our slogan and our music. You can import one of them, you can import two of them. So you import them based on how you need to use them. If I need to use only our slogan, it means I'll import only our slogan in this file. But if I need to use the two of them, it means I'll import the two of them in this file. So let's go and use the console.log statement there to log our slogan to the console and log our music to the console. Now if we come here to our terminal and we run the server file, you'd see we have this. We have stop raping women, which is our slogan, and we have code play everyday life, which is our music. So that's how to do more than one export in a module and import more than one export in a module. So now let's talk about core modules in Node.js. By now we already know what core modules are. Let's start with one of the core modules known as the OS module. So what does the OS module actually do? The OS module in Node.js helps you interact with the operating system your Node application is running on. So if you have a Node application that is running on a Windows laptop, the OS module will help you recognize that the app is running on a Windows laptop, and it's going to use the functionalities of the Windows operating system on the app. So let's import the OS module. First, let's create a file called os.js. We are going to learn everything about the OS module in this course in that file. So let's import the OS module let's create a variable called our OS, and let's require the OS module like that. So this is how to import core modules in Node.js. As you can see, I have no relative path. I have no // just quotes and the name of the module right there. So we are going to look at some functions in the OS module. Let's look at the total mem function, which we are going to use to see the total memory size of my laptop. So I'll create a variable here and I'll call that total memory, and I'll set this to, this is not a default variable actually, so you can call it whatever you choose to call it. Now let me set that variable to our OS, which is now the OS module. And I'm saying that because we required the OS module and we saved it in the our OS variable here. Remember, I said the require keyword is what actually does the importation. So when we import the OS module with the require keyword here, we are going to save it in the our OS variable here. Now this variable represents the OS module, and total mem is a function in the OS module, so we are going to invoke that with the brackets there. So when I console.log total memory and I come to the terminal here and I run node OS, because I'm trying to run the OS file right there. When I say node OS and I hit enter, you'd see it returns the total memory size of my laptop to me right there. So I can look at other functions in the node module. Let's look at the platform function. Let's say my platform, and the platform function will be used to check the platforms of our machines. So let's say platform right there, and let's console.log my platform. Now when I run the file in the terminal, you see it says Win32. If you're using a Mac system, you'd have Darwin, I think, DARWIN. Now let's look at the CPU's function that's going to give us the system information of our machine. So let's create a variable here and let's call that sysinfo, and let's set this to our os.cpus, and we are going to console.log sysinfo right there. And if we run this in the terminal, you'd see we have the information of my system returned right there. So let's look at another function in the OS module that's going to return the architecture of our machine. And let's say my architecture, let's say my arch, and let's set that to our os.my.arch. Okay, arch, yeah, let's say arch right there, and let's save that. Now if we console.log my arch and we run this in the terminal, it gives us x64. So these are few functions in the OS module that we are going to talk about in this video. There are more functions in the OS module. You can actually come here and you hit the dot sign. You see we have more functions here in the OS module. So you can play around with these functions to see what they actually return. Let's move over to another Node.js module known as the path module. Now the path module in Node.js provides useful functions to interact with file paths. So to use the path module in Node.js, we will have to import it the same way we have imported the OS module right there. So let's create a file called path.js, and in that file, okay, path.js, not sj, so let's correct that, path.js. So we are going to import the path module, let's say our path, and set that to require path, and that's all. We have imported the path module. So before we go further in the path module, I want us to talk about two properties in the path module that are always going to be helpful, and that's the dir name property and the file name property. So if we console.log these two properties to see what they return to us, we are going to understand them better. So if we say dir name and we console.log file name right there, and if we run this in the terminal, node path, not OS. You see we have this returned to us. We have tutorial returned to us and path.js. Now this is the directory that we are currently in. It starts from the C drive, which is the root, to the users folder, Joseph Brendan, to the desktop. Yes, desktop is a folder, and it goes to tutorial. Tutorial is a folder that we created on our desktop. Now right here it gives us the file name that we are currently in, and the file name is path.js. so that's the function of the dir name property and the file name property. So we have other functions in the path module, functions like the join function, which is used to join two paths together. So let us use the join function to see how it works. So let's create a variable called our new path, and let's set that to our path, which is the path module currently. So our path.join. The join function is a function in the path module. Remember, I said modules can have classes or functions or properties or anything JavaScript inside of them. And the path module, being a core module, is a module created by the Node.js team for us. So they created lots of functions inside the path module that's going to help us in development. So I'll invoke the function by putting brackets in front of it. Now, the join function is going to take this argument, dir name. After dir name, it's going to take another argument, a subfolder. I'd call that CSS, and I'd call the file that will be placed in the CSS subfolder index.css. Now when I save that and I come here and I console.log our new path and I run that in the terminal, and I say node path, it returns this to us right here. It says users Joseph desktop tutorial, then it says /css and /index.css. So if you look over here, we don't have any subfolder or any file created in any subfolder. We are going to do that with another core module known as the file system module in combination with the path module. So what we have here in the join function is this. Where do you want to join something to? We want to join whatever we want to join in the current directory. And the property that returns the current directory that we are in is the dir name property. Remember, I talked about it before now. So join whatever we want to join to the current directory that we are in. So that's the use of the dir name in the join function bracket here. Now after that, what's the folder, the name of the folder you want to join to the current directory that you are in? It's the CSS folder. After that, do you want to add a file to the subfolder? Yes. And the name of the file will be index.css. So it's as simple as that. So let's move ahead to learn about the file system module and see how we can combine the file system module and the path module to create a subfolder, create a file in the subfolder, and write to the file. So let's come here and let's say fs.js. Now first things first, let's import our file system module, and we are going to save it in a variable called our fs. Let's require, and let's say fs. That's all. That's how to import the file system module. Now let's import the path module. Let's call this another path, and let's set require to path, because we are going to use the path module in combination with the file system module. So that's why I'm having the two modules imported right there. So first things first, let's create a subfolder. Let's say create folder, and let's set that to our fs, which is now the file system module.mkdir. mkdir means make directory, which also means make folder. Now, where do we want to keep the folder that we are going to make? We are going to use the path module to specify where the folder will be kept. So we are going to pass in the path module, which is another path, and we are going to say another path.join. Now the join function is going to specify the current directory that we are in. And after that, it's going to specify the name of the folder that we want to create. After that, let's come out of the join function. We are outside the join function currently. So we are now in the mkdir function. Now in the mkdir function brackets, we are going to pass in empty object brackets there and pass in a callback function. Still inside the mkdir function right there. Now remember what I said callback functions are. Callback functions are functions that run inside a function. As simple as that. It can get more complicated than that, but just for now, just know that callback functions are functions that run inside a function. So this function now runs inside the mkdir function, and this callback function is just going to do one job: check for errors. So we are going to check if there is an error while this code is running, and we are going to say if error, if there is an error, console.log error while creating folder, or else console.log folder created successfully. Now let's save that. Now if we come down here and we console.log create folder and we run this in the terminal, you see we have nothing coming up. We have nothing returned to us because we are actually running the path module in the terminal. So let's say nodefs. Now when I hit enter, you see it says folder created successfully. And if we look right here, you see we have a subfolder created. So let's go ahead to create a file in the subfolder and write to the file. So we are going to do that using another function in the fs module known as the write file function. So we are going to say create file. Let's say create file, and let's set that to our fs.write file. Now we are going to say another path dot join. Now right there we are going to say their name as usual, HTML, and just to mention, the write file function in the file system module is able to create a file and write to the file on the fly. So that's the folder, the HTML folder, and we want to create an index.html file in that folder. Now we are going to come out of the join function, and right here we are going to pass in what we want to write in the file, and not there. I'm going to say h1, this is HTML, and I'm going to close the h1 tag. Now outside the quotes there, we are going to pass in our callback function, still inside the brackets of the write file function. I'm going to pass in error as the argument, checking for errors, and that's a callback function. So let's check if everything is okay. So we have to put the comma there, and that's fine now. So let's check if an error is what we are going to have. So if error, console.log error, or else console.log success. Now let's save that. Now if we come out here and we say console.log create file, and we go to the terminal and run our code, we say nodefs, you see we have success right here. So if we go to the subfolder now, you'd see we have an index.html file in the subfolder, and inside the index.html file we have this h1 tag written to the index.html file automatically on the fly. So let's talk about another core module in Node.js, and that's going to be the URL module. So I'll create another file here and I'll call it url.js. Now in the url.js file, I'll import the URL module, and it's still the same way. You require this and you just say URL, and that's it. So the URL module, for me to use some properties in the URL module, I'd have to create an instance of a URL. So I would say const my URL, and I'll set that to new URL, and URL is going to take an actual URL. I'll pass in http // and I'll say migrant-solutions.com port 3000, and I would say / index.html, and I'll pass in our parameters. I would say ID set to 100 and status set to active. Now that's that. So I'm going to use some URL properties in Node.js to analyze this URL that we have here. So let's create a variable. Let's call this path name, and let's set this to my URL.pathName. Now path name is a property, not a function, so you won't see me having the brackets in front of it. So if I console.log path name now, this path name in this bracket is actually this one here. It's this one here, right in front of const, not this one. This one is the property name. So this is the one that I am saving everything inside. So that's what I'm putting inside console.log. So to make this very clear, let me change that to uppercase P and uppercase N. So if I come here, I can say path name, uppercase P and uppercase N. So when I run this in the terminal, when I say node URL, you see it gives me index.html. So that's the path I'll be taken to if I click on this URL. The path will be / index.html. So let's look at other properties in the URL module. Let's look at, let's say, root domain, and let's set this to my URL.host. Now let's console.log root domain, and let's see what we have. So we have migrantsolutions.com on port 3000. So that's our host or our root domain. So if I check another property, I should check for the host name. Let's say our host name. Let's say my URL dot host name. So when I console.log our host name and I run this in the terminal, you'd see I have migrantsolutions.com. So this is the host name, and this right here is the root domain. So if I check another property, which property should I check? Okay, let's look at the parameters here. So let's use search params. Let's say const our parameters, set that to my URL dot search params. If I console.log our parameters and I run this in the terminal, you see we have this ID set to 100, status set to active, what we have here. Now if your code is not running, it may probably be that you are not saving your file after typing what I'm typing. So I didn't mention that from the start. When you type, you save. So that's all we are going to look at in the URL module. So let's move over to one of the most important modules in Node.js, and that's the HTTP module. The HTTP module in Node.js contains functions that makes it possible for us to build a server in Node.js. So we shall be building a server using the HTTP module in Node.js. So let's create a file called http.js, and in the file let's import the HTTP module. Let's call this our HTTP, and let's require the HTTP module right there, and that's that. We have imported the HTTP module. So let's create a simple server to return something basic on our browser. So let's create a variable here. Let's call this our server, and let's use our HTTP module, and let's say create server. So create server is a function in the HTTP module that is used to create a server. So the create server being a function will take a callback function for request and response as its argument, and this function is an arrow function. It's going to set response dot write. So we are going to write to our response, and we are going to say subscribe to angry black woman on YouTube and Facebook. So that's what we are going to write to our response. So let's end our response by saying response.end. Let's save that. Now if I come here in our terminal and I say node http, you see we have nothing returned to us, because here we just created a server. And what does a server do actually? A server listens for requests and sends response, because that's what it does. It serves the request of users. So how do we know if a request has come to the server? We have to make a server listen for a request, and that's very easy. We are going to say our server dot listen. So this means our server is listening. So our server will listen on port 3000, and it's going to throw in a callback function that will say console.log angry black woman server. Okay, I messed the quotes there. Angry black woman server is up and running. So let's save that. So if I run this file again in the terminal, you see I have this saying angry black woman server is up and running. So if I go to a browser and I hit localhost port 3000, I would have this response returned to me, because me hitting localhost port 3000 on the browser, it means I have sent a request to this server, and it's going to send me a response. So for now, this is the only response our little server will be sending to anyone who makes a request to it. So when I go to the browser and I say localhost port 3000, you see it says subscribe to angry black woman on YouTube and Facebook. It's very easy. So with this, we have actually understood the core concepts behind spinning up a server using the HTTP module in Node.js. So we are going to look at spinning up a server that is going to return a HTML file using the HTTP module in Node.js. So let's get rid of this and let's leave the imports. So in this case, we shall import the path module, because we are going to use the path module to locate where our index.html file is located. So we are going to say require, using the require keyword, we import path, and our file system, say our fs, set that to require also, and it's going to import the fs module for us. So we are going to save that. First things first, let's come here, not in the HTML subfolder there, in our tutorial folder, let's create an index.html file and an about.html file. So in the index.html file here, we are going to generate a boilerplate, and this is going to have a title, angry black woman, and in the body there, we are going to pass a h1 tag that's going to say angry black woman on Facebook and YouTube. Then we are going to pass in a p tag, and let's just pass in a p tag that says subscribe for interesting content. Let's save that. So let's copy this, go to our about.html, and let's paste that. So let's edit this and let's say about angry black woman visit her YouTube page, and her Facebook page. So let's save that. Now we have created an index.html file and an about.html file. So let's use the HTTP module to create a server that's going to return our index.html file and our about.html file to the browser when a user makes a request to visit those routes. So let's go back to HTTP and let's create a server. Let's say a server, and it's going to take our HTTP, which is our HTTP module, and we are going to say create server. Now this is a function that's going to take a callback function with request and response as the arguments. Now right here in the callback function, we are going to specify based on the user's request. So we are going to say if the request that the user is making .url. This means if the URL of the user's request is pointing to home, to just /. Now / means home page. So if the URL in the user's request is pointing to the home page, what do? Let's use the file system module to locate where our index.html file is, so that we are going to return that to the user. So we are going to say our fs.read file. Read file is a function in the fs module. Read file, then we are going to use our path, which is our path module. So what happens here is we are using the file system module and the read file function, which is in the file system module, to read a file. Now which file do we want to read? We are going to use the path module to point the file we want to read. So our path.join. So join is going to collect their name, which is the current directory that we are in, and the name of the file is index.html. That's the file we want to read. So our fs.read file will read a file. Now which file do we want to read? Because we have to specify a file to read. Now the path module and the join function, which is in the path module, will specify that that file is in the current directory that we are, and the name of the file is index.html. Our current directory is the tutorial folder, and our index.html is in this current directory. So we are going to pass in a callback function that's going to check for error and for results. So we are going to set the name of the result as data. So when we set that callback function as an arrow function, it's going to say response.writeHead. What writeHead does is writeHead writes to the head of our response. And since our response is going to the browser, our browser needs to see that this file that's coming is an HTML file, so that it can display it as an HTML file. So we are going to specify that in the writeHead function. So writeHead will take its first parameter as 200. We talked about HTTP status codes. 200 means this request is okay. So then we are going to pass in an object, say content type. The type of this content is supposed to be in quotes, I think. That's why it's not showing me those colors. Okay, content type, and we are going to set the content type to text/HTML. So this will specify in the head of our response that the file that is coming to you, the browser, is an HTML file, and the status of that request is okay. Now we are going to go to the next line, and we are going to say response.write. Now we want to write to our response. What do we have to write to our response? We are going to write the result, which is the data, the result that was gotten from reading the file. So everything that was read inside index.html is now saved as our result in data. So this is what we are going to write in the body of our response that will be returned in the browser. So we are going to say write data. Now let's end our response as usual. Let's say response.end. Let's invoke that. So that's us sending a response only when a user goes to the home page. Now, if the user goes to the about URL, we are going to return the about page to the user. And we are going to do that also by saying if request.url is equal to, use triple equal there to be very sure, let's say about. We are going to say our fs.read file. That's going to take the path module.join, and as usual, the dir name and which file do we want to read, about.html. That's the file we want to read, about.html. Now, outside the join function, we are going to check for error and for data also. So that's an arrow function. So right there, we are going to do the same thing. Response.writeHead, and in the writeHead function there, status 200, which is okay, and content type in quotes. I always forget that. Content type, which is going to be set to text/HTML, and I think it's still the same process. Response.write, and this is going to be data. Now let's end our response. Response.end. So we have created a server with the HTTP module that's going to return 2 HTML pages for us based on the URL in the user's request. Now we are going to see how that works. So for now, let's listen for a request. And the way to do that is easy. We say our server.listen. Now let's listen on port 3000, and let's pass in a callback function that's going to say console.log server is up and running. Let's save that. Now let's break the server we had running before. Let's run our HTTP module once more. Now let's say node HTTP, hit enter. Server is up and running. Now if we go to the browser and we head to port 3000 and we refresh this page, because already it's on port 3000. So if I refresh this page, you'd see I have this angry black woman on Facebook and YouTube. And that's because my URL is pointing to the home page. Nothing in front of my URL. So that points to the home page, which means that points to the / URL that we have here. And it's going to return index.html for me, which is this angry black woman on Facebook and YouTube. Now if I go back to my browser and I say / about, it's going to return about angry black woman, visit her YouTube page and her Facebook page. So this is how to create a server using the HTTP module in Node.js that's going to return a static HTML web page for you. Now this is all we are going to look at in Node.js for now. Let's move ahead to learn Express. Now you would see that with Express we are going to write less code, creating a server and spinning up a server. But before that, let's talk about what Express is. Express is a Node.js framework. It is an easier way to work around Node.js, obviously. We shall be using Express more in building our applications. So without much talking, let us create a new folder on our desktop. Let's break this server that we have running here to avoid errors in the future. Let's create a new window and let's open that. Let's create a new folder. Let's pull up our terminal, cd to the desktop directory, and use mkdir to create a folder called Learn Express. Let's call this folder Learn Express. So the folder has been created. Now let's go to our desktop and open that folder in our VS Code. Where's the folder? Okay, let's create that folder once more. Let's call this Learn Express. Let's go to our desktop and see if that's showing up. Okay, here we have the folder. So let's open this folder in our VS Code and let's see what we are going to learn about Express. So before we create a file, like I said earlier on, we need to run the npm init command so that our package.json file will be created. So let's say npm init and let the command run. Hit enter. Let's call this server.js. Hit enter. Let's call this Joseph. Hit enter. And that's all. So we shall always install Express with the npm command. So we are going to say npm install or npm install Express, and let's wait for that to be installed. So this is how to install the Express framework in your Node project. So our Express framework has been installed in our project. Now if I go to package.json, you'd see I have this here under dependencies. So let's create a server.js file and import Express like we import other core modules. So we are going to say const express, and we are going to require it like that and say express. Now we are going to create an instance of the Express framework right here. So let's create a variable called app. Everyone likes to call it app, and it's conventional to call this variable app. You can call it whatever you want actually, and we are going to set this to express, and we are going to invoke express like that. So with that, we have created an instance of the Express module and we have saved it in the app variable here. So with this, I can come down and listen for requests. I can say app.listen, and I can say port 3000, listen on port 3000, and an arrow function that's going to say server up and running. Server is up and running. Now when I save that and I run this file, when I say node server, you see we have server is up and running, although we have nothing to return back as a response. So we are going to get to that. So for us to return a response when we have a request, we are going to use the app variable here that now represents Express to say app.get. So we talked about the get request and the get methods in HTTP. So the get property here means this route will be for when a user is trying to get stuff from our server. So we are going to say app.get, and get is going to take the route that the user has in their URL. So let's say the user is trying to go to the home page, which is just /. We are going to pass in a callback function that will take request and response as usual, because that's what servers do. And in the callback function, we are going to send a response.send, just something basic. Now let's say h1 in the send. Let's say this is a response. Now let's save that. Now we can come down here again and say app.get, passing another URL, let's say about, just like what we did earlier with the HTTP module in Node.js. Would say request and response also, which is a callback function, and we are going to send a response again that says response.send, and right here we can just say this is about it, and let's save that. So if we run a server once more, okay, we have an error here, and let's see. Okay, h1, this is supposed to be in quotes, so we are supposed to have these in quotes. Now if we run a server again, see it says server is up and running. So if we go to port 3000 on our local host, you see we have this. This is about it, because we are in the about, we are sending a request with an about URL. So if we send this with just the home URL, you see it says this is a response in h1. So we just did what we had here in HTTP in few lines. You see all of these lines here that looks very complex to understand. We just did all of that same thing here using Express, but this time it looks very easy because it is actually easy. So you use the app keyword here that now represents the Express framework as a whole to set your route. So I can say app.post, app.put. I can say app.post. But this is when I want the users to make a post request, maybe send details from a form to the server. I can say app.delete. I can say app.put. So this makes it easier. So at this stage, we have learned the very basics of Node and Express. So I am going to use our knowledge to build a sign-up API. And at this stage, we shall learn how to use MongoDB to store our users that are signing up on our application. So every other thing about Node and Express will be explained while we are building this project. So let us break a server here. Now let's create a folder with the name API tutorial. So let's open a new window. Remember, we have other VS Code windows here for all we have learned. Let's open a new window and let's maximize that. Let's pull up our terminal. Let's go to our desktop directory and let's make a folder called API-tutorial. Now let's open that folder in our VS Code. API tutorial. This is it right there. Now in our API tutorial, the first thing to do, like I always say, is run npm init. So let's pull up the terminal so we can see clearly. Let's say npm init. Let's hit enter. Let's set this to server.js. Author Joseph Brendan. Enter. And that's that. After this, we shall need Express. And apart from needing Express, we shall need other packages like Mongoose and NodeMon. Now, Mongoose is a library of MongoDB. Remember, I said that we shall use MongoDB in storing our data. So Mongoose is a MongoDB library that makes accessing and dealing with MongoDB very easy. So we shall install Mongoose and we shall install NodeMon. Now NodeMon is something that makes our development easy, because if you have been noticing, for me to see updates, I have to break my server, reload the server, manually break the server again. But NodeMon is actually going to listen for changes. Now the moment I hit Control Save, NodeMon is going to update the changes automatically for me, so I don't have to break the server to reload the server for me to update my changes. So without talking much, let's install Express, Mongoose spelled like this, and NodeMon spelled like this. You can install more than one package at once. All you need to do is separate them with a space. Express space Mongoose space NodeMon, and hit enter. Now give it some time, it's going to install the 3 packages. So all our 3 packages have been installed. Now to confirm that, if you go to package.json, you'll see we have Express, Mongoose, and NodeMon. Now for us to make our NodeMon package active, let's come here and let's change test to start, because we shall use the NodeMon package to always spin our server, and we want the command to be something like npm run start. So start will be the last command. So which file do we want to run when we say npm run start? We want to run the server file, the server.js, which is our main entry point. So we are going to say NodeMon server.js. Save that. So let's create our server.js file. Let's say server.js. Let's import Express. I'm doing React. Let's say const express, and let's require express right there. So after importing express, let's initialize the app here with express, and let's say app.listen on port 3000 with an arrow function that says console.log server is running. So when we come here in our terminal and we say npm run start, you see nodemon is active. It says server is running. So whatever change we make here is going to be updated automatically. As you can see, it says server is raw. So when I update this back to running and I save that, it says server is running. So now let's create a subfolder and let's call that API. That's where we are going to have all our routes. I'm going to explain that later. So let's create a file in the API folder. Let's call that routes.js. Routes.js. Now in the routes.js, we are going to import Express also. I keep importing like I'm in React. So let's say Express, and let's initialize app there. Now in this file, I'm not going to say app.get. I am going to use what we call routers in Express. So that's very easy. I would say const router set to express.router, and I have that initialized. So I'm going to say router.post or router.get or router.put or router.delete, any of it. Now I am going to say router.post because I want to actually create this route for users that want to sign up to our application. So when users want to sign up, they send a username, an email, and a password. So that's a post request. So that's why I'm going to say router.post. This route here that I'm about to create will handle the collection of the data from the users, and it's going to send it to the database. So this route here will handle the collection and the sending. Collection from the front end and sending to the database. So router.post. Now, what are the parameters? It's going to take a URL. It's going to be in the sign up URL. That's not default. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You can say register, sign up, or anything you want to call it. Maybe log up or something else. So after that, it's going to take a callback function as usual that will have the two arguments, request and response. Then this being an arrow function will be like that. Let's just do response.send, and let's write send there for now. So inside this module, we'll have to export whatever is happening here so that any other module in our project can access it. So what is the wisest way to export files from this module? Since we know all we are going to create here are routes, and we are going to use router.post or router.delete or router.get, it is wise enough to export router, because when you export router, you export every other thing that is on router in this file. So if I have a let's say I have a router.get here, get is on router, post is on router. If I have a delete, it will also be on router. So the best thing to export here is router. So I'll say module.export, set that to router. I'm done with my export in this file. So let's go back to our server.js and let's import the routes module that we have created here. So let's say const, let's call it route URLs, set to require, and let's say API/routes, and that's that. So in the server.js, we are going to set the URL or the route part of this route.js module that we have here. I'm going to explain that. Don't overthink this. So I'm going to use what we call middlewares. So middlewares are able to pick anything from the request or from the response and manipulate it, but they mostly sit in between the response and the request. So app.use is always going to be used by me or by anyone you see to create mostly a middleware. So right here in the use function, I'm going to set the URL for this route here. So I'm going to do that by saying /API. Since I am creating an API, I'm creating a sign up API, /API/routes. Now these words are not default words. You can call them what you choose to call them. So when I say /API/routes, I would now say routes URLs. So what this means is this: route URLs will come after /API/routes in the address bar or as a URL. So API /API/routes are like our base URLs that doesn't change as long as you want to go to this route here. So if I had another router.post here or a router.get that has not sign up, sign in or something, if I want to have this on the browser, it's going to look like localhost /API/routes/sign in. If it's for sign up, it will be /sign up. But if you notice, API/routes will never change. The only thing that will be changing is sign up or sign in, but /API/route will never change. So let's get rid of this and let's go back to our server.js file. So this means append route URLs or the route you have in route URLs to /API/routes. So for now, we have created our routes for the route.js. The next thing we need to do is to create our schema. And when I say schema, I mean create the design for how our database will look like. And when you hear schema, schema can be explained using a typical spreadsheet. So when I say create a spreadsheet template for everyone who attended the webinar, and the data I want you to collect is their names, their emails, and their location, all you'd find yourself doing is creating a column for name, creating a column for location, and creating a column for emails. So that's the same thing with creating a schema. It's like designing your database based on how you want to collect data or give out data. So let's create a schema, and we shall do that using the package that we installed called Mongoose. So let's create a subfolder called models. Now the models folder will be where we shall create our schema, and we shall create a schema in a file called, let's call this routes model, capital R as you can see there, routes model.js. So in our routes model.js file, the first thing we are going to do is to import Mongoose, and we are going to say require Mongoose. We have imported Mongoose just like that. So we are going to use Mongoose to create our schema, and like I said, our schema will be our database design. So to create a schema, we will create a variable here called signup schema, and we are going to set that to a new instance of the Mongoose library .schema. So we are going to pass that as a function, and since the schema is going to be object based, we are going to pass in curly brackets inside the other brackets there. And now what do we want to collect from the users for registration or for signing up to our application? We are going to specify those now. We want them to set a username. The username will have a data type of string, and it's going to be required. Set required to true. So that's one for the username. We are going to require them to type in their password or their email rather, and that's going to be a data type of string also. And we are going to set this to true, require to true. After the email, we are going to require the users to type in their password. So the password will be set to a data type of string also, and we are going to make it required. That did not autocomplete for me, so we're going to say required true. Now finally, we are going to pass in a date function. Now this is always going to be needed because you need to know the exact time and the date a user signed up to your application. So we are going to say date, and we are going to say type, set it to the date function, date. Now we are going to say default will be date.now. So finally, after creating our schema, we are going to export our schema, and we are going to say module.export, and we are exporting mongoose.model, and we are going to pass in the name of our table. Let's call it sign-up.db. We are going to see these in effect at the end of everything. Then what are we exporting? Sign-up schema, the sign-up schema that we created here. Now I'm saying module.export set to mongoose.model because I'm sending this to a MongoDB database. So I'm exporting mongoose.model, a mongoose model, and I'm giving it a table name of sign-up.db, and I'm exporting the schema that I have created here called sign-up schema. So that's all for creating a schema. So let's head over to our route.js and let's create an instance of our schema that we have created. So here in our route.js, we are going to import the schema that we have created, and I'll call this sign up template, so it's going to be clear for everyone to understand. Sign up template, and I'll require this, and I'll use the double dots / so I can access the models folder and the routes model file. So after creating an instance of our schema here in our routes file, I'll take this out, say consecrated user, and I'll set this to a new instance of our schema that we imported and saved in sign up template. So I'll say new sign up template. What do I want to pass in here? I'll pass in everything we have in our schema: username, email, password, and dates. So I am creating a new instance of a user, and each user that will be created on this application will have all of these fields sent to route.js and sent to our database from route.js. So I would say username set to request.body.username. So what this means is this: grab the username that's in the body of the request that the user has made. So if the user clicks on sign up, the user has made a post request. So grab the username that's in that request and save it here in front of username. As simple as that. So I would say for email also, I think email is the next. For email also, I would say request.body.email. Then for password, what do we have here also? Username, email, password. Then for password, I would say password will be set to request.body.password. And that's that. I won't pass in the date field because, like I said earlier, the date field right there in our schema is a function. It's going to execute itself the moment anything is sent to the database. So it's going to be automatic. So right now we have created what will be sent to the database when a user makes a post request on this sign up route. So when a user makes a post request on this sign up route, this whole code here will run. And what this code here does is it creates a new instance of our schema. And in that instance, it grabs the username that the user has sent in the post request. It grabs the email that the user has sent in the post request. It grabs the password that the user has sent in the post request. Now, what do we do with all of this data? We save them. So we are going to say created user.save. We are going to save that. Now, when we save that, we are going to say .then, and we are going to say if everything is fine, grab everything and store it in this variable called data. Then we are going to throw in a callback function there, and we are going to set the response.json because we are going to pass this as a JSON file. And what are we passing as a JSON file is the data. If there is an error, we are going to catch the error, and we are going to say error, which is an arrow function. We'll say response.json, and we are going to pass in error right there. So we are done with this route. So the next thing we are going to do is to connect our API to our MongoDB database. And to do that is very easy. Head over to MongoDB Atlas, and I would say MongoDB cloud.mongodb.com. If you don't have an account, sign up for an account. It's free. If you have an account, you log in with your email, and when you're logged in, you'll be taken to your dashboard. This is what you are going to have. You have to take note of this step so you don't have any issue at all. Click on all clusters here. When you click on all clusters, you will see you have one cluster if you are new to MongoDB. But if you have been working with MongoDB, it's possible you have created an additional cluster just like myself. I have two clusters here. So I would select this cluster here, this one up here that says josephs.org/customer. But you are most likely to have /project 0. So if this is all you have, click on cluster 0 under project 0. I'll be clicking on cluster 0 under customer. So when I click on cluster 0, it's going to take me to this board right here. Now come here to network access, which is by the left side of the page. Click on network access, click on add IP address, and make sure you select allow IP address from anywhere or allow any IP address to connect. But make sure the IP address you have here is 0.0.0.0/0. This will make connection to the database easy. After that, click on database access. When you click on database access, click on add new database user. So I'll put in Burner Boy right there, and I'll put in Burner Boy here. Let me click on show to be sure. Okay, I have more than one A there, so it's correct. Burner Boy as the password, Burner Boy as the username. So click on add user. So when you click on add user, it's going to say we are deploying your changes. So when you come here to clusters and you click on clusters, you would notice this line moving around your cluster here. That means it's deploying. So you give it some minutes depending on the strength of your internet connection. Alright, the changes to my cluster has been deployed successfully. So the next thing you will do while you are on this page, if you are not on this page, click on clusters to find yourself here. Click on connect. When you click on connect, you select connect your application. When you click on connect your application, you would see this link here with copy over here. Click on copy to copy that link. Now take that link to VS Code. Normally we are supposed to paste that link in server.js, but that will be us pasting raw data in server.js, and when we push it to GitHub, anybody can see it. So for this, we are going to use our .env. So all you need to do is to break the server first. Let's break our server. Let's do npm install .env. So while .env is installing, let's come here, let's create a file called .env. Now in our .env file, let's create a variable called database access, database underscore access with double C. Take note of your spellings, and we are going to set that to that link that we copied from MongoDB. Now in that link, we are going to make some changes. Username will be what we created, which is Burner Boy. Password is Burner Boy also, so take note of that. Now we are going to change our DB name to what we have in our schema. So let's go to our schema, route model.js, and let's see what we have here. Remember, I said we are going to see the use of this table name. So we are going to copy this, sign up DB, go to our .env file and paste it right there, sign up DB. Now let's save that. Now for us to use the .env file in server.js, we will need to import .env. So let's say .env is equal to require .env, and let's save that. So after importing .env, we are going to activate .env by saying .env.config with the brackets there. With that alone, you have activated the .env in your project. Now we are going to connect our application finally to our database, and we are going to do that using Mongoose. So let's import Mongoose in our server.js file here. Let's say Mongoose is equal to require Mongoose. Now let's come here and let's say mongoose.connect. Connect is the function in Mongoose that will connect our application to our MongoDB database. So connect being a function will take the bracket in front of it. And how do we connect to our database? We are going to say process.env.database access, because for us to connect to our database, we need our credentials to grant us access, and the credentials are stored in the .env file inside this variable called database access. So for us to access the variable in the .env file, we needed to install the .env package so that we can use process.env to access it. So after that, we are going to spin up a message to tell us that our database is connected, and we are going to do that in a callback function that's going to say console.log, let's say database connected. Now let's save that. So we have one last thing left in our server.js file, and that's what we call body passes. Let's write that down so you see. Body passes. So body passes will be used to pass our incoming requests. So without body passes, your code or your application may not run as it's supposed to run. So these days with Express, we don't need to install body passer as a third-party package. All we need to do is to initialize it as a middleware. So we are going to say app.use express.json and invoke JSON like that. And that's all. So let's us run a server to test everything we have done so far to see if it's going to connect to our database. So we are going to say npm run starts, and as you can see, we have the message that says database connected. So the next thing we are going to do is to send details to our database to see if our API is working perfectly and sending sign up details from our application to the database. But before that, let's copy this message here and let's paste it. It's a deprecation warning, although it's not harmful, but let's just paste that there. And if we run our server again, you see that message won't come up. We just have only this one. We can leave it this one. We are going to use a package known as REST client. Now, if you don't have that installed in your VS Code, click on View, go to Extensions, and search for REST client. When you search for REST client, this is it. Click on Install, and that's all. And you are ready to use it. So, some people actually choose to use Postman for something like this. If you know how to use Postman, fine, go ahead and use Postman. But in this video, I shall use REST client to do my testing. So if you have the REST client installed, click on New File, and let's call this file test.http. This is going to be the file we are going to test our API in. So I'll hit that. So in our test.http file, we are going to make a post request, and the post request will be sent to http localhost port 3000 /API /routes sign up, and I'm going to say http /1.1. So now this route is what we have here, sign up, and if you come here, we have /API /routes and /sign up. So that's the route we want to make the post request to, and it's running on localhost port 3000. Now we are going to set the content type. We are going to set our content type to application /JSON because we are trying to send a JSON object. So you give one space down. Now let's mimic a front end, because we don't have the time now to build a React front end with forms. So let's mimic a front end. What's going to happen in the front end is what we are going to do here. So I would create our form fields, and if I go to our routes model, we have, or if I go to the routes file here, we have username, email, and password. So I would set the username as a JSON object. Remember, the key values are wrapped in quotes. I'll set the username to Mike, set the password. What do I have there? I think I have set the email to mike@mail.com, and set the password to Mike23, and I'll save that. Now if I click on send request, this is supposed to send it to our database in MongoDB. Now if I have any errors, it means I have made a mistake somewhere. So when I click on send request while our server is running, let's see what happens. You see I have a 200 status code showing up, which means everything is okay, and my data has been created, which means it has been sent to our database in MongoDB. Now if I go to MongoDB and I click on clusters, and I come here and I click on collections, now when you click on collections, it's going to load all the data you have in the database. Now if your collection is done loading, you would see the name of the table we have here. The name of the table that we have here is called signupdb. That's what we defined in routemodel.js. We called it signupdb right there. So that's what's going to show up in MongoDB. So the name of our table here is signupdb. So when I click on signupdb, you see I have this data showing up. I have mike@mail.com, mike23 as the password, and I have the date generated automatically, and I also have the ID generated automatically. All these other entries here are entries I entered before, because I have actually used signupdbs to make a tutorial before now. So that's that for now with Node, MongoDB, and Express. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share.